According to Russian President Vladimir Putin, Ukraine isn't a state, but according to Russia's disinformation factory, Ukraine is an American project, and the European Union is telling Ukraine to buy gas directly from Russia as Ukraine is ready to end economic sanctions on Russia. Welcome to StopFake, the place where we debunk this kind of Russian disinformation. So let's get to it. Russia's political talk show program Bolshaya Gra, The Big Game, broadcast on the First State channel, declared that Ukraine is an American project. This claim had allegedly been put forward by the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. The host of Bolshaya Gra, Vyacheslav Nikonov, declared, quote, "The most important statement made about Ukraine last week was made by U.S. Secretary of State Pompeo while in Berlin. For the first time, he directly and openly called modern Ukraine an American project." But what Pompeo actually said was that securing peace and stability in Ukraine is a project that the United States is working on. On November the 8th in Berlin, at the invitation of the German think tank Korber Stiftung, Secretary Pompeo delivered a speech on the occasion of the 30th anniversary of the fall of the Berlin Wall. In the ensuing discussion, someone asked Pompeo how committed is the United States to peace and stability in Ukraine. Here's what Pompeo actually said.
Very, very committed, yes. Yes, it's a project we've been working on. I remember I was at the Munich Security Conference when I was a member of Congress in Kansas, and I remember pushing. The topic at this time was whether defensive weapon systems would be provided to the Ukrainians. This must have been 2015 or 16. And I remember Germany deciding it was a bad idea, and America deciding it was a bad idea. President Obama deciding it wasn't something he wanted to do. In fact, President Trump has now not once, not twice, but 3 times come to provide the tools so that the Ukrainian people can protect themselves from Russian aggression in the Donbass. We're proud of that. We think it makes sense. We think it makes sense for freedom. We think it makes sense for Europe. And we think it makes sense for the world and Ukrainian sovereignty. We're very clear about our position on the invasion of Crimea that happened in the previous administration, and how it is we're going to work to develop a prosperous Ukraine that is less corrupt and capable of moving itself towards the West.
This week, Russia's state news agency TASS featured a story claiming the European Commission recommended that Ukraine purchase natural gas directly from Russia. The fake story was quickly disseminated through social media, as well as scores of Russian news outlets. TASS's source for this fake story is an anonymous EU source that is close to the three-party talks between Ukraine, Russia, and the EU. Ukraine's state gas company Naftogaz categorically denies these claims. On its official Facebook page, the company denied the claim being circulated by pro-Kremlin media and said such reports only demonstrate that Russia is using political pressure to push through a deal with Ukraine. Naftogaz says that the European Commission actually made recommendations to Russia's Gazprom and not to Ukraine's Naftogaz, advocating that Gazprom should conclude a long-term deal with Ukraine's new gas transit operator in accordance with European laws and regulations. This would satisfy the commercial interests of all parties and ensure Europe's energy security. After Ukraine's Naftogaz refuted these fake claims, TASS changed the text of its story but kept the headline, "EU recommends Kyiv return to direct gas purchases from Russia," continuing to misinform its readers. TASS only changed the story in its Russian language version, and the English version made no mention of Ukraine challenging the fake Russian claim. Citing an anonymous source is one way of disseminating fake information. As a rule, an anonymous source is almost impossible to verify, but we here at StopFake have been able to repeatedly trip up Russian propagandists when they use anonymous sources. Russia's Gazprom has proposed to Ukraine's Naftogaz to extend the current gas transit contract or drop a new one for a period of 1 year with the condition that both parties abandon all claims pending in international courts of arbitration. Russia also demands that Ukraine cancel the fine levied against Russia's Gazprom for violating competition rules, and also demands that Ukraine's Naftogaz withdraw its petition to the European Commission to investigate Gazprom for antitrust violations. Ukraine has said that these Russian demands are unacceptable. Scores of Russian media reported last week that Ukraine is ready to lift economic sanctions against Russia. They cite Ukraine's Deputy Prime Minister for European and Euro-Atlantic Integration, Dmytro Kuleba, who actually said that Ukraine has been ready to end sanctions against Russia for 5 years. Kuleba seemingly made these claims in an interview that he gave to the Ukrainian news site RBK Ukraina. In the RBK interview, Kuleba does address the issue of Russia's sanctions. However, he never says a word about lifting them. In fact, he says Ukraine should not allow sanctions against Russia to be lifted. Quote, "Our first task is to prevent the lifting of sanctions," Kuleba said. As for the claims that Ukraine has been ready for 5 years to end sanctions, this is a distortion of what Kuleba actually said. When asked how prepared is Ukraine if at some point the sanctions regime on Russia will not be prolonged, Kuleba answered that Ukraine has been prepared for this for 5 years, since the sanctions were first levied. Russian media deliberately took this 5-year phrase out of context, falsely claiming that Ukrainian authorities have been ready for 5 years to lift Russia's sanctions. That's it for this week. You can find much more dissected disinformation on the StopFake website, stopfake.org. Be vigilant, look out for fakes, and if you spot any disinformation about Ukraine, forward it to us for a truth autopsy. I'm Marko Suprun, and this is StopFake. Thanks for watching.